In this video, we will introduce Configuring JSF. Our web application must be configured to use JSF before we can actually run any JSF-specific tags or beans. JSF specification identifies several files that can contain managed bean configuration information. The JSF implementation looks for and processes files named facesconfig.xml and also looks in the web.xml. This is primarily for JSF components packaged as jar files that are part of the application. Let's look at a basic example. First, let's take a look at the web.xml. In order for JSF to bootstrap correctly, the Faces servlet must be configured in the web.xml to route requests through it. Here we specify our Faces servlet with the servlet name and the servlet class. We give it a load on startup equals 1. It should load first. Then, we map our Faces servlet to handle various files, .xhtml, .jsf, and .faces extensions. Okay. Again, we specify in the web.xml that a Faces servlet is responsible for handling JSF applications. The Faces servlet is the central controller for the JSF application. The Faces servlet receives all requests for the JSF application and initializes the JSF components before the JSP is even displayed. Now let's take a look at facesconfig.xml. The facesconfig.xml allows us to configure the application, manage beans, converters, validators, and navigation. But because we're using annotations, our bean configuration will be in the bean via the annotation. Here we have our application element with a message bundle and a locale config. The message bundle specifies the location of our message file. JSF does the internationalization of an web application automatically. Like setting the right locale for views, JSF determines the locale in the following sequence. First, it searches for a match between request locales, looking for header accept language, and supported locales. Then it searches for the application default locale of the Faces config file, and lastly, it searches the JVM default locale. The JSF implementation looks for and processes files named facesconfig.xml. It checks the web.xml deployment descriptor for a context parameter named javax.facesconfig files. If the parameter exists, the value of the parameter must be a comma delimited list of file names that will be processed as JSF configuration files. The file names must be relative paths from the application root to the file, such as webinf myconfig.xml. This is if you want to add even more managed beans or configuration for the JSF implementation. The configurations files are used to identify the managed beans, provide initialization parameters for the beans, and identify the navigation rules for the application. Now let's demonstrate our functionality with our web app. We will open the web address using the internal web browser. I have the internal browser open in a tab. If you don't have it showing, you can use Eclipse's built-in browser. First, let's select the window from the Workbench menu bar. Navigate to Show View and select Other. Make sure the general folder is open, and then you can select the internal web browser. In the address bar, I will enter the address to our index.xhtml. Here we can see our JSF-powered form. We will exercise our form. Let's enter in a name and a last name. Hello, test, test. We can see the output. Now let's test the validation. Remember that I had given it a minimum length of 5 and a maximum length of 8. And here we have our validation. Length is less than allowable minimum. This concludes our discussion of configuring JSF.